Excellent. So again, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for accompanying us today on a network analysis of the work of the Colombian Truth Commission on exile. I'm very happy to see so many of our good friends for many years and also so many students. My name is Josefina Echavarría, and I'm a professor of the practice at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, Director of the Peace Accords Matrix, and Director of the Legacy Project. I am very glad to welcome Cécile Mouly, who is a researcher from FLAG. So I'm going to tell some more words about your background, but welcome, Cécile. Welcome to the Kroc Institute once more. She is going to present some preliminary findings of a joint research project that maps the volunteers in 24 countries who contributed to the work of the Truth Commission abroad and the network that it was used to connect with each other. She has worked on this project with Jeff Pugh, whom we saw his name online. He's accompanying us today from the University of Massachusetts. And he will also be joining us for the Q&A in case we want to talk to him a little bit more. Cécile is professor and researcher at the Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales, Flaxo in Ecuador, and an expert in conflict analysis for the UN Systems Staff College. Cécile holds a PhD in international studies from the University of Cambridge and has published on peace building, peace processes, civil resistance, and the reintegration of former combatants, including a recent open access handbook on peace and conflict studies that I very much recommend to all of you if you are studying peace and conflict studies and can read Spanish, and an edited book on the peace process between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army, ELN. In addition to her academic background, she has practical experience in conflict transformation and peace building in different countries like Burundi, Nepal, Ecuador, and Colombia, with various organizations like the UN, the Fire Center, the Organization of American States. Something very important about Cécile's background today is that she was part of the Ecuador team of the Colombian Truth Commission from 2019 to 2022, and is now involved in efforts to support the legacy. So Cécile is here today at Notre Dame this week, thanks to the generous support of the Kellogg Institute. This was not coordinated in advance, but thank you, Aníbal, very much. The same as Denise and so many of our colleagues at the Kellogg Institute, which sponsors both internal and external research grants to present their work on the transmedia files of the Truth Commission. Let me also take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the Klingham Family Center for the Study of Modern Ireland, the Lucy Family for Data and Society, and the leadership and staff at the Kroc Institute to help us carry this project forward. So after Cécile's talk, we will hear from two different respondents who are here with us today. First, from Maria Caterina Gargano, Kat, who is a PhD candidate in peace studies and psychology here at the Kroc Institute. Kat received a BA in psychology from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Laura Magistra in protection of human rights and international cooperation from the University of Bologna in Italy. Kat's research focuses on migration, interpersonal violence, including intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, and mental health. Secondly, we will have Maria Paula Prada, who is a visiting research fellow here at the Kroc Institute. Maria has been engaged in dialogue, peace building, and transitional justice work for over 17 years, focusing on policy and project design and implementation, facilitation, and strategic multi-level networks for political engagement and social ownership. She was a permanent advisor to the president of the Colombian Truth Commission, Father Francisco Roux, and coordinated the design and implementation of its out-facing and sustainability strategy. Also very important for us, Maria was the person who first asked the University of Notre Dame to host the transmedia files, which is the way that all this project originated. So many thanks also for that initiative, Maria. Cécile, now just a quick reminder, You have around 30 minutes to present your talk, and then we will give the word first to Kat and then to Maria Paula. And then we will, of course, open the floor for a Q&A with all of you. Thank you very much. Cécile, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to present, as Josefina said, are preliminary findings of a joint project with my colleague Jeff Pugh, who will join us for the Q&A. And we're focusing on the network structure that enabled the Colombian Truth Commission to carry out its mandate abroad, more specifically on exile. So, I forgot. So, does it work? No. But I did it twice. Not yet. So I don't have a good finger. So it's not okay. I was told that it never fails, so I don't know. Okay. So okay. So our presentation is structured as follows. So first, I'll give a brief introduction. Then I will present our theoretical framework, like very briefly, our methodology. And then I'll go into our main argument. So our main argument is threefold, but we will focus only on the two first aspects in this presentation for the sake of time. So in this work, we argue that the network structure, the transnational network structure of the Colombian Truth Commission enabled it, A, to overcome the legal and administrative challenges to be able to implement its mandate abroad. Second, that it enabled it to include exiled people in the truth-seeking process. And third, that it generated greater ownership of the process and also made it more sustainable. And then I'll give some brief conclusions. So in terms of introduction, I would like to say that the Colombian Truth Commission worked in 24 countries outside of Colombia. And it was the first Truth Commission that did systematic work with exiled people. In order to do this work, it relied on a network structure made up of mainly volunteers, but also a few staff, paid staff. And this network structure was made up of different actors, mainly exiled people, but also members of organizations supporting migrant and exiles and academic institutions and so on. So in this research project, we're analyzing that network structure and how it enabled the Commission to be able to conduct its work. Our theoretical framework is really based on the idea that we explore of transnational transitional justice, which is something new in transitional justice. And in order to do this, we build on three types of literature: transitional justice, network governance, and transnational advocacy network. And with the pioneering case of Colombia, we have the opportunity to theorize about the role of transnational advocacy networks in making it possible for a Truth Commission to expand its special mandate and be able to work globally. Indeed, Truth Commission, like the one in Colombia, can expand their impact through transnational networks in three key dimensions, highlighted in the transnational advocacy network literature. The first one is by facilitating the transnational implementation of a Truth Commission's mandate in situations where such a mandate does not formally contemplate this transnational dimension, or in which a commission lacks the funding or administrative capacity to carry out such work. The second is by providing transnational access to voices and experiences relevant to the truth-seeking process. And the third one is by expanding dialogue with key actors involved in the process. And these dimensions correspond to three main categories of transnational network capital: first, capacity; second, pluralistic access; and third, ownership. So our methodology is mainly qualitative. We do a case study to analyze the role of various actors in the work of the Colombian Truth Commission outside of Colombia. And we conduct a network analysis to understand the network structure that allows these actors to carry out their work, the role of each actor in the network, and the relationships between these actors. Our data collection relies on first semi-structured interviews with former staff of the Truth Commission, members of the nodes, which are the local structures on which the Truth Commission relied to conduct its work abroad, and support organization. Second, on official documents, including from the transmedia. And third, a variety of different other sources. We also build on our first-hand experience as members of nodes of New York, Boston, in the case of my colleague Jeff, and Ecuador in my case. We then conduct a network analysis of the actors involved in the work of the Truth Commission abroad and the network structure that connected them with the assistance of the UCNet software using quantitative and qualitative mixed methods. Our main argument is threefold, as I mentioned. So first, we argue that this transnational network structure of the Truth Commission allowed it to build three types of transnational capital that enabled it to fulfill its mandate despite budgetary, time, political will restriction. Second, incorporate a broader and more diverse range of voices spread across different geographic spaces in the construction of the historical truth. And third, enhance its relationship with key actors in different countries where many Colombians have sought refuge, thus achieving a greater ownership of the process and a greater impact. So in this map, you can see the initial planning of the Truth Commission to establish local structures to support its work abroad. But it's interesting to first note that exile was not explicitly contemplated in the Truth Commission's mandate. So Commissioner Carlos Beristain had to convince other commissioners of the need to develop such a structure abroad to involve exiled people in the Truth Commission process. In addition, there was a lack of experiences, as I said, of systematic work with exiled people in other Truth Commission. Liberia being one of the rare cases where this has taken place, but not in a systematic way. So the Truth Commission had to build such a structure almost from scratch and adapt it along the way. So they made an initial planning, envisioning, as you can see in the map, the need to create local structure in 5 key geographic areas, each coordinated by a liaison officer. Europe, North America, really Canada and the US, Mexico being with Central America, the Andean region, and the southern cone of South America. Since it could not use public funds to create local structures abroad, it mainly relied on volunteers, as Josefina was saying, especially from local organizations of exiled persons and migrants, and B, external resources from foreign donors and local organizations that support migrants and refugees. Also, the Truth Commission could not depend on Colombian embassies or consulates to carry out its work abroad in order to preserve its autonomy, and also because in many places the relation with these entities and between these entities and exiled Colombians was tense and there was a lack of trust. Two networks of exiles organization created during the 2012-2016 peace process, the Foro Internacional de Víctimas, FIV, and the Revit PASLAC, lobbied for participation in the Truth Commission even before it was established and were represented in many nodes. During the first 6 months of preparation of the Truth Commission's work, Commissioner Beristain traveled to 8 countries with the financial support of IOM and the International Center for Transitional Justice to explore possibilities of developing the basic structures that would enable the Truth Commission to implement its mandate abroad. During these exploratory trips, he met with local exiles organizations, many of which were part of these 2 main networks, potential offenders, and other relevant contacts. The international cooperation agencies of Catalonia and the Basque Country were among the first donors who supported the work of the Truth Commission, and they did so through the International Catalan Institute of Peace, ICIP, and the Institute for International Cooperation and Development Studies, EGOA, which funded most of the work of the Truth Commission in Europe. Furthermore, ICIP became the technical secretariat of the nodes of Europe, providing them with technical assistance, and they channeled some funds through UNDP to support some of the work of the Truth Commission in Europe, Mexico, and the Southern Cone, including the initial trainings of testimony takers. The Truth Commission obtained external funding to hire 5 liaison officers who were the only paid personnel of the nodes, based respectively in the Basque Country for Europe, the UK, Mexico, Ecuador, and Argentina for the Southern Cone, as you can see in this map. These locations were chosen because of the amount of exiled people and funds available. Additionally, some members of supporting organizations, for example, Swiss Peace, participated in a node as part of their job. The rest of the members, they were all volunteers. These differences between voluntary and paid staff, between nodes with a liaison officer and nodes without, and between fully funded nodes and those with limited access to funds, created imbalances in terms of dedication to the work of the Truth Commission and were a source of conflict over access to resources in some cases. The organizational structure built by the Truth Commission to implement its mandate abroad was flexible, depending on each context, and therefore did not always develop according to initial plans. For example, in contrast to the initial Truth Commission plan, you remember that map? No nodes spanned multiple countries, as it turned out that a regional approach was too difficult to sustain. Likewise, some nodes initially envisioned to be national in scope were replaced by nodes in multiple cities or regions within a country. The specific context led people to work together either at a national or subnational level, especially in large countries like Canada, the US, Brazil, or Spain. Each node involved different actors depending on local dynamics and the trust networks resulting from the contacts made by the Truth Commission during its exploratory visits to each country, as well as pre-existing networks in which the members of the nodes were situated. In addition, because of their dependence on the voluntary work of most members, the nodes varied in composition over time in function of the availability of different actors and the activities. So in these maps, you can see the 24 countries where the Truth Commission worked. In blue are the countries where the Truth Commission had multiple nodes. And in kind of pinkish, or I don't know what's this color, where there was one national node, and this more like yellow-orange is where the Truth Commission worked but had no node. So while in most countries, as you can see, the Truth Commission worked through nodes, either self-recognized as such or with other names, for example, working group. It was not the case in Peru, the Netherlands, and Australia, where local dynamics did not permit the establishment of a node, although some interviews and activities took place in those countries. The Truth Commission team in Bogota had not planned the creation of what were called internal thematic groups. This emerged early on during an encounter of the European nodes as a result of the need to tackle certain issues transversally. For example, the internodal group on gender aimed at providing a space for exiled women to talk about their experiences, and it was particularly active, reflecting the fact that the majority of volunteers working for the Truth Commission around the world were women. The flexible nature of the organizational structure of the Truth Commission abroad ensured that people could participate in different spaces and activities according to their interests, profile, and availability. Some persons, for example, chose to only participate in internal groups, not in the nodes of their respective countries. Likewise, some people in the nodes took testimonies, while others focused on pedagogy or other endeavors. The activities carried out by the nodes and internodal groups also reflected the diversity of members involved in their backgrounds, for example, artistic, as you can see in this slide. So here in this slide, you can see our initial mapping of the network structure that enabled the Truth Commission work outside of Colombia. While most nodes involve members of exiles organization, individual Colombians, either exile or not, members of peace and human rights organizations, staff from migrant support organizations and academic institutions, there are also other sectors represented like artists or trade unionists in some cases. So here you will see that each colored symbol represents an actor, and the lines between them represent that they had a relationship or connection in carrying out the work of the Truth Commission. So we distinguish actors according to their scale, the shapes. So for example, square means a local organization, circle a national organization, a triangle a regional organization, and diamond an international one. And the colors help us to distinguish with what kind of organization. So for example, in pink, like the center node, which is the Truth Commission itself, are Colombian state institutions. Red, other countries' state institutions, for example, like a ministry of the UK or, blue, civil society organizations, purple, intergovernmental organization, yellow, like networks, more informal networks, and green, academic institutions. And you can see that the Truth Commission is the main hub, but there are also clusters among several of the other organizations that we are hoping to further explore and analyze. In the next slide, you can really see the importance of exiles organization, because we have also made, distinguished among certain subtypes. For example, in civil society organization, we distinguish between exiles organization and other types of local civil society organization. And in this slide, in blue, in red, you can see the exiles organizations and networks. So you can see that they have a very important role in the node, with multiple other groups connecting through them to reach other parts of the network. At headquarters, the International Macro-Territorial Office provided common guidance, either directly or through its liaison officers. The coordinator of the International Macro-Territorial Office and 5 researchers supported the work of the different nodes under the supervision of Commissioner Beristain. ICIP, as I mentioned, acted as technical secretariat for the Truth Commission in Europe, convening annual meetings of the European nodes, in addition to providing technical and economic support to them and to internodal groups, and playing some coordinating role in the Catalonian node. The representatives of some local support organizations, such as Swiss Peace or EGOA, also played coordinating roles in local nodes, in addition to funding or raising funds for these nodes. And virtual means of communication, especially after the pandemic began, facilitated exchanges between the International Macro-Territorial Office and local actors in the different countries, as well as between local actors from different countries. One of the main pillars of the work of the Truth Commission abroad was the collection of testimonies by exiled people about the human rights violation that led to their victimization, as well as the exile process in itself, including its impact and how people coped with it. So one of the first steps in this endeavor was the dissemination of the mandate of the Truth Commission through organizations of Colombian exiles and migrants, social networks, the media, and the distribution of materials such as leaflets and the presentation of the mandate in public events, and with the support of universities and local organizations. The goal was both to raise awareness and build trust in order to increase participation in the process. The European nodes had a website managed by the Colombian German Institute CAPAS, but this was not the case of most other nodes, which essentially relied on social networks such as Facebook to inform about their activities. And only few nodes used local media to broadcast information about the work of the Truth Commission. Another crucial step was the selection and training of testimony takers. The Truth Commission organized such trainings in different places at different times, and those trained were mainly Colombians, including exiled persons and others, academics, and members of support organizations. In total, some 200 persons were trained as testimony takers for the work abroad. And testimony takers with different profiles, for example, Colombians and internationals and foreigners like us, like Jeff and I, help to reach out to a broader range of exiled people and ensure that people interested in giving their testimony could provide it to people in which they felt more trust. Exiles organization and migrant support organization, but also individuals, played a key role in establishing contact with people to give their testimonies. For example, as you can see in the picture, the local organization FASIC in Antofagasta in Chile played a crucial role as a bridge between testimony takers and interviewees. Yet, despite many nodes' efforts to reach out to broad public, only a few people came forward without any previous contact. This means that interviewees tended to be people from cities, belonging to migrants' organizations, or receiving support from humanitarian entities. Migrant support organizations, the psychology departments of some universities, NGOs specialized in psychosocial attention to victims of migrants, and a few Colombian psychologists provided psychosocial support to those giving their testimony, and also in some cases to those taking those testimonies. The internodal group on psychosocial work, created along the way and supported by the psychosocial unit of the Truth Commission, provided some common orientation and opened a space for discussing strategies of psychosocial support among the different nodes. In addition to the collection on individual testimonies, some nodes, individual and groups involved in the work of the Truth Commission abroad chose to document particular cases, such as the illegal spying of Colombian activists in Europe, while internodal group and others drafted specific reports to illuminate certain aspects of victimization, for example, gender, or impact, such as inside. The internodal group on gender, for instance, submitted a report on exiled women, including recommendations. The transnational network structure of the Truth Commission was also helpful in facilitating the organization of activities of recognition of the experience of exiled people. The Truth Commission organized two specific international events, a virtual one to recognize Colombian exile in general, as you can see in the slide, and one in Ecuador to recognize more specifically exile in border countries. All the nodes and internodal groups participated actively in the virtual events, presenting videos, artistic works, and testimonies. And the event in Ecuador counted on the participation of the nodes of Ecuador, Panama, Costa Rica, Venezuela, and Brazil, and particularly on different local organizations in Ecuador that provided funding and logistical support. In this slide, you can see the very important role played by academic institutions in green. They represented about 1/5 of the entities that supported the work of the Truth Commission abroad, which is a much larger share than in Colombia. And this was the case in particular of some of the organizations I mentioned before, ICIP, EGOA, Swiss Peace, and CAPAS, which really offered a lot of support to the work of the Truth Commission, like providing funding for testimony taking, helping with the dissemination of the Truth Commission's mandate, providing space for meetings, events, and so on, but also of different universities in Europe and the Americas, which facilitated the organization of in-person virtual events and so on. Academics also often have experience with interviewing, which was a useful skill, and access to resources, physical spaces for meeting, and an administrative infrastructure that can be useful, for example, to receive and disperse funding, which was often a key need within the network. Like academic institutions, churches and faith-based organizations offered crucial support to the nodes. According to the final report of the Truth Commission, they provided quote, spaces of encounter and dialogue that enable the weaving of relations and network of allies, and quote, abroad. They funded some of the nodes' activities, facilitated safe spaces for taking testimonies or organizing events, and helped reaching out to Colombian exile. Interestingly, actors who were not members of the Colombian diaspora sometimes played a mediating role in the nodes. This role was all the more important since Colombian exiled people were often divided for political reasons, but also sometimes for funding issues and interpersonal conflict. And in some cases, these divisions resulted in A, two different groups working in parallel in the same country, like in the UK. B, the splitting of a node into two, like in France. C, some people preferring to collaborate with the Truth Commission from outside formal structure. Yet in others, certain actors help to bridge differences between divided groups and to facilitate the collaboration of actors who had not worked together before. So here are some of our conclusions. The case of the Colombian Truth Commission really offers very valuable insights for theorizing about how a network structure provides greater possibilities for implementing transitional justice mechanisms transnationally. Indeed, this Truth Commission relied on a network structure made up of different types of actors to implement its mandate outside of Colombia, which allowed it to expand its capacity to reach out to victims abroad by increasing its transnational network capital. So more specifically, first, the ability to meet the basic administrative and funding needs of the different nodes, thanks to the organizational infrastructure of key actors in different countries, such as, for example, making payments to interviewers, offering space to conduct activities, carrying out tasks to disseminate the Truth Commission's mandate, so on, all of which was crucial owing to the legal restrictions that prevented the use of public funds allocated to the Truth Commission outside of Colombia, and the challenges that would entail working with Colombian embassies and consulates. Second, trust and access to the exiled Colombian population and other key actors in host countries. And third, increasing the ownership of the process by different actors who contributed to the work of the Truth Commission abroad, making this process more sustainable and impactful. It also shows how different actors played a variety of roles that were essential to the successful implementation of the Truth Commission mandate abroad. And this research also makes a methodological contribution, since the application of a network analysis through qualitative and quantitative methods can expand the methodological potential to analyze the structure and composition of the transnational networks on which transitional justice mechanisms depend to work with exiles. Finally, it offers useful insights into policymaking regarding transnational transitional justice processes and the use of networked governance structures to ensure the participation of exiled people in peace-building processes in their country of origin. And thank you very much, and we would welcome your question.
Thank you very much, Cécile. Before we open it up for Q&A, I would like to ask first Kat and then Maria Paula to offer some comments and, of course, questions and feedback. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Cécile. That was so interesting to hear. Even though I've discussed with you before, I feel like every time that we talk about it or I hear you talk about it, I learned so many new things. So thank you. And thank you, Josefina, also for having me. So there are so many different parts of this that stood out to me. Since I focus on migration and mental health, I'll try to rein it into those to keep it under time. But I do think that there are so many phenomenal different methodological pieces as well that we could go into. One thing that stood out to me right off the bat was the flexible implementation. So like kind of allowing it to like the process and the nodes to grow and develop and emerge how they wanted to and how it might work differently in different places. So there was, instead of sort of constraining people and saying like, okay, this is how it's going to work, we're going to stick to this initial map. I thought that allowing people to really have a chance to sort of mold it into what works for them in a process and participate in whatever ways and at whatever levels they were comfortable with was really a special thing, especially coming from, you know, a research academic kind of side. It's really cool to see that bridge and be able to say like, we can do research that is also, you know, more flexible and adapt and learn, and we can adopt methodologies to go along with that. And I think a lot of times in migration work, something I hear a lot is sort of like, oh, well, there's like all these limitations, like we can't do it because this, or we can't do it because that, or that hasn't been done before with this group. And so I think it's one of those moments for me, like learning about this, where it's sort of like, oh, it only can't be done until somebody does it, right? And so a lot of times in my work, working in different transit countries like Mexico, Italy, Serbia, like all around the world, I would hear like really similar comments from people who are migrating or who had been exiled, where they were saying like, well, I don't really know, like I have this stuff, like these stories, or I have this experience, or I have this knowledge, and I'm carrying it with me, and I don't really know, what to do with it. Like, where do I connect with it? I'm not really represented, like I can't vote in where I am now, or I can't be part of decision-making processes where I am now. But I also can't really participate at home, right? And so that's one of those things where it's like, it's never been done before until now, right? So I think that that's a really big innovation and something really important that jumped out at me is that representation aspect of sort of creating a space where people do have access to decision-making and to influence sort of the construction of truth and of history, which would be incomplete without their voices and stories also being represented. So I hope that there's going to be a lot of other future opportunities for other contexts to learn from the work that you're all doing. Additionally, thinking of it from a mental health perspective, we know that a lot of some of the main areas that are impacted a lot of times by trauma or by stressful events are like safety, trust, power and control, ability to like connect and share with others, things like that. And so another level of it that I was reflecting on, especially this time listening to her present again, was this idea of not only are the nodes sort of filling this function of collecting more testimony, offering a space where people can sort of translate their experience into language and sort of begin to reconnect and make sense of it and integrate it into their future and their life, and continue to do that because everybody's kind of on their different trajectories and at different points in those trajectories as individuals. But then by also having the nodes, some of that repair at more of like a community level or a family level and starting to integrate back and rebuild trust in community is something that I know Cécile mentioned that I was really curious to kind of hear more about of this process of, okay, well, maybe there wasn't some trust initially, or there's sort of these fragmentations in different groups, but over time, as you start to kind of work back together, there's also that capacity for healing across different social ecological levels, I guess. So the individuals like maybe sharing their testimony, but also people having an opportunity to engage and like hear and kind of collect testimony if they chose to, or form a working group if they chose to, right? I think is really powerful and has a lot of potential just for healing in and of itself. And I thought that the emergent working groups were also something that I was really curious about. So if there's time during the Q&A to expand a little bit more on sort of how those started, what that kind of looked like, the process of, because I know that the working groups were working across different countries, different contexts, and they were really focused on things that came up kind of organically that were really important to people. And so I think knowing that, for example, there's like a whole gender group, and I know that's one of the more active ones, and there's also a mental health group. So I think that those are ones also that even above kind of, I guess if there's like the individual level, there's like that community kind of level, and then there's these international groups that are really spanning across nodes, and that kind of connection being built over time, I think will be really powerful as well. And that kind of leads to, I guess I'll try to wrap up. But that leads to something that really stood out to me with the arc of it, I guess you could say. So there's like this engagement before where people are advocating actively and lobbying and saying like, we want to be part of this. And then there's also this part during it where people are engaging in all these different ways that I've kind of talked about and you talked about. And everybody is contributing and engaging how they want to. And then at the end, I think there's still a lot of potential for some really interesting future steps of it. So a lot of different ways that it could be sustained, that I would be curious also for that if you have time in the Q&A of how, like, what are some next steps or some objectives that you might see people being excited about as they continue, like either in the working groups or other parts of this that people are going to sort of sustain on their own, even after maybe the official mandate ends for the Truth Commission. So what are people, maybe looking for at that nodal level, but also the international kind of working group levels. Those are my main kind of points, but there is so much that stood out to me, and thank you again.
Thank you. Maria Paula.
So thanks, Josefina, for the possibility to join Cécile and Kat today. Cécile, as a Colombian and as a former public servant of the Truth Commission, I would like to express my gratitude for your contributions as an ally during all this process. But of course, for the continuity you have given to this now with the lenses of the research. So thank you very much. And dear Kat, thanks for your contributions. And I'm very happy to see that we didn't have the possibility to talk before, but now you will see what I have prepared. And it seems to be that the exact points are very important for you and for me. So in order to keep in time, because I was also part of this process and I tend to engage with a lot of my ideas while I'm speaking, I will try to stick to the paper. So allow me to read. Let me contribute to this session with a voice from the practice. We have learned that peace building is about weaving, networking, building bridges, bringing back together, connecting and reunifying. And this study allows us to comprehend how this happens in the practice. It also invites us to go beyond the traditional weaving between opposite actors like victims and perpetrators to understand that, at least for the Colombian case, the weaving is also needed to connect the country politically and socially with its ordinary citizens who had to leave the country because of the armed conflict, who had a story to tell that contributes to a comprehensive narrative of the truth, and who also have a role to play in order to advance towards non-repetition and reconciliation. Despite the physical distance and the factors for the exile, they all have the right to truth. I would like to add also that some of these activities were developed together with the Peace Tribunal, the head, and the unit in charge of searching for the persons deemed as disappeared. It was a collective effort, initially led by the Truth Commission, but that now continues under the mandate of these two institutions. Having experienced this work from within the Truth Commission as a staff, being also paid for it, I would describe this process of the Colombia outside Colombia, that's the name we gave it, with three elements. I would say there was a political commitment and vision. It was the vision and conviction of a commissioner, Carlos Beristain, as well as the support of all other commissioners and an incredible team of 5 persons that allowed all this to happen simultaneously in 24 countries. The institutional framework was not designed to do it, and being very honest, if I only imagine that we would have tried to define a structure to develop all this, I'm sure the result would have been dozens of meetings with lots of frustration and less of concrete and meaningful results. Second, I would say global solidarity with the victims. Only the strong collaboration of hundreds of allies allowed this experience that Cécile has so carefully explained today. I can argue that all and each of the institutions and persons that contributed to this purpose came out of their comfort zone and somehow managed to overcome their own internal legal and admin frameworks, but also emotionally, to be able to support this task timely and within so sensitive psychological conditions. And third, a real sense of welcoming inclusion and diversity. The nodes made it possible with a diversity of practices, backgrounds, resources, and levels of trust. Each of the nodes came forward with relevant and significant experience that, besides contributing to the mandate of the Truth Commission, was personally and institutionally meaningful for each of the allies who participated during the process. That is the basis for social ownership nowadays. The diversity is showcased in the transmedia platform, from which I guess you have already heard about, and if not, I'm always happy to share. I would summarize by saying it was a one step at a time, but never one step backwards approach. We all knew it was extremely challenging and uncertain, but we all knew that was the right direction. Once one door was closed, there was always someone in the room with an idea for Plan B and Plan C. And today we are able to look backwards to understand how we did it. Coming from a country that has 9 million victims, almost the size of Chicago, and being aware of the world's level of armed confrontation, I can only encourage all us, practitioners and scholars for peace, to always believe there is a way to weave and build bridges if we keep human dignity as our common vision. We have heard today that the role of academic allies all over the world was decisive for this work in Colombia to happen. Today, almost 2 years after the end of the Truth Commission, I can confirm that we still need these alliances active in order to advance towards non-repetition, and that universities, once again, have an outstanding role to play. How? For instance, contributing with applied research and policy work regarding the so-called war on drugs and the industry of arms. I am sure that this could be a contribution beyond my country and beneficial to other nations facing right now armed confrontations. This is part of our global solidarity and peace practice. I thank you once again for being here. And I also think that the contributions and the state of the art of the transitional process in Colombia right now is the result of 60 years also of trying to move forward, 40 years, 12 peace agreements, going back and forth. But I am sure that working in alliances within Colombians and with Colombians outside Colombia is going to be a way that will help the country sustainable, but also that can inspire other countries for instance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for your discussion points, for your feedback. I think that they complement each other very well from different perspectives. Cécile, would you like to say something about Kat and Maria Paula's response?
Well, they were very much to the point, but maybe because Kat was asking me some specific questions, maybe I will just tell a little bit more about the internal groups. As I mentioned, they emerged during the meetings of the nodes in Europe, and not in the first one, but I think in the second one. It was in 2019. I can't remember, maybe February, or I can't remember the date. Or no, later, I think. Yeah, they emerged, and one of the most active one, as you mentioned, was gender, but there was also an internal group on disappearances that was really very active in Europe. There was one also on second and third generations. There was one, as you said, on psychosocial work. There was supposed to be one more like on academia, but this one didn't so well.
Well,
yes, and I forgot also ethnic groups. There was a MESA, like a round table, but it doesn't translate well into English. Especially in Europe, with some connection, for example, from the people in Canada, there was an ethnic node there. So there were, in different thematic areas. And as you mentioned, some people actually didn't feel so comfortable in the nodes themselves. For example, certain women, they actually only worked in the internal group on gender because that was really what was meaningful for them. In terms of sustainability, just very briefly, as a result of the great work done by Maria, there's been actually a strategy for these groups not to just, stop working after the release of the final report, but to really have a strategy of legacy. So right now, for example, there is a network of different groups working for legacy in Europe that is called REL. They have actually used the same website that CAPAS managed, and they have transformed it into the REL website right now. And even in the Americas, we are still working together, the different groups. Sometimes with new people, as I said, like in the notes, the composition varied across time. And we're still working together, and we are working hand in hand with now what is called the Follow-up and Monitoring Committee, CSM by its acronym, which is the successor of the Truth Commission. And there is one representative of the exile population in that committee, Doris Ardila. I think she might be connected. She told me she would be connected. So we're working with her and with the committee as such, supporting different initiatives, in particular pushing for the implementation of the recommendations about exiled people that are contained in the final report. There is a full volume on exile made up of different chapters. So it's a very significant part of the final report.
Thank you very much, Cécile. And just to mention that on the Transmedia website, you will also find an entire tab dedicated to not only gain like factual knowledge about what exile meant, It was one of the biggest impacts of the war, but as a violation of human rights, but also some of those artifacts that were created and collected by the work of this extraterritorial approach. So you can see, for example, wonderful artistic exhibitions about objects that people took with them when they left in exile, and then how through these objects the testimonies were gathered. So what you have is not only an understanding or a better understanding of that factual truth of the war and the resistance to the war, but also, I would say, a narrative and historical account of what exile has meant for so many Colombians outside of Colombia. And with this, I would like to ask you if you have questions, if you raise your hand. Yes, I'll just start with Arif. Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, Cécile. Hi, everyone. My name is Arif. I focus on the easiest context, Afghanistan. Thank you so much. This is a great presentation, and I really relate to the exile part and lots of the organizations that you described who were outside and that they were doing lots of important work. I have a question on the dynamics and the relationship between those organizations and the ones that were inside the country. Particularly when you talk about testimonies, then the source, the authority of those testimonies could be questioned, and forces inside could sometimes try to delegitimize the authority, and by delegitimizing the authority, they also question the authenticity of the stories themselves. And so how did those dynamics work in that context in relation to the Peace Commission? And I'd love to hear on all of those things that you could share in this side. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we collect a couple of questions? Yes, yeah.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm Isabel, PhD student in political science and peace studies. I would like to ask you two questions. One is coming from this network diagram that shows how some organizations were, or nodes, or these transnational organizations were connected to the Truth Commission directly, whereas others were connected through nodes or other national or bigger organizations. So my question is basically if you can elaborate a little bit more on differences between these transnational organizations that to some extent engaged in the Truth Commission's work. So for instance, I'm thinking about the State Committed Crimes, that movement, MOVICE, that was so active not only in Colombia, but also in Europe, and that was actively engaging in truth-seeking and also criminal accountability even before the Peace Accord, right? In contrast to other organizations that perhaps were created in the midst of these truth-seeking and transitional justice mechanisms. So I would like to hear more about that. And the second question is related to the concept that you are elaborating here, transnational network transitional justice. So when you were explaining this concept, a book that came to mind was Caterina Seeking's analysis of these transnational legal networks, how other lawyers and human rights defenders help victims in Argentina and other countries to pursue criminal accountability. So I wonder to what extent this concept is quite different from that work that is already out there and that shows these different transnational networks for any sort of truth or criminal accountability mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Cécile, would you like to start with those questions?
Maybe I think we could give Jeff the opportunity to answer whatever he wants, and I can complement.
Absolutely, if Jeff is online.
Hi, I'm here.
Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Super. Maybe, Jenna, can we
see
sharing?
Jeff so that he's really
Yes, so we can see him. Excellent. But you
okay, I can start in the meanwhile if you want. So Arif, you were asking about the relationship between exiles organization and organizations inside. There are some relations, and in particular, some of the exile people, some of them have returned. So there are also people who were in exile before and were either during the Truth Commission process were back in Colombia or afterwards. And so actually there are connections. There are always connections between exiles organization and organizations, different type of organization inside Colombia. In the international group of gender, for example, it's particularly interesting because they work a lot with women's organization in Colombia, for example. So there are relationships. In the work outside of Colombia, I would say that most of the relationship that really made that work possible were really relationships in the different countries, in the different host countries. Like, for example, for the node, the UK node, for example, to be able to work, they really worked mainly through organizations that were based in the UK. But this said, there are, networks that connect all these, like two main ones that I mentioned. The maybe more important than Movice and the local Colombian organization, like the leading human rights organization or victims organization. The most important ones for exile were the two I mentioned. Foro Internacional de Víctimas, FIV, and Revik Paslak. FIV is active all over the world, even in Japan, Australia, and Revik Paslak in Latin America and the Caribbean. And these two main networks, they grouped a lot of local organizations. Like, for example, Revik Paslak, it includes Colpas in Mexico, it includes CERCE in Ecuador, it includes MECOPA in Argentina, OCOCH in Chile. So there are networks of exiles organization in different countries. And these were really the most prominent actors in this work. But I leave it now to Jeff who has appeared to complement.
Jeff, lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Josefina, and thank you for making it work for me to be able to zoom in and for us to be able to share this research. So I'll get to the questions here. I just want to say that many of the folks who have spoken so far have said, I'm going to try to constrain myself because I was an active participant in this and I care about it and passionate, and that applies to me too. And I think that's partly why this is such an innovative project. This was an innovative approach to transitional justice, right? Colombia was a pioneering case that has done new things. And so it makes sense for the people who are part of it to be able to tell that story. And I'm hoping that that's one of the sort of contributions of this, is just to help document what happened and a little bit of analysis of why, so that, for the future we can learn from it. I'll try and pick through a few of the different things that were brought up. So in Kat's comments early on, she talked about this, coming at it from a migration and mental health perspective and appreciating the flexibility and adaptability of the Colombian Truth Commission. And I'll highlight that's one of the areas where there was an initial reluctance to really take full advantage of a networked approach. I know in our training in the United States of testimony takers in February of 2020, the question was raised, should we allow virtual interviews to happen? And many of the mental health practitioners who had done this work before said, we don't think that's the right thing to do. We should have it happen in-person spaces because there are risks and it's hard to do. Well, of course, a month later the pandemic happened and we spent several months just sort of throwing up our hands. We have a mandate in this amount of time to get this done. How are we going to do it? And so to some extent that innovation and adaptability was forced during part of this process. First by the need to figure out how to coordinate a whole bunch of volunteers without using Colombian state resources. And then second, in the pandemic, where we were forced to not be in the same room, the connections through virtual space of these networks became both necessary to make progress and also an avenue for even more sharing of resources. In some cases, it made it easier to take advantage of the networks. I know some of the nodes in Europe said after that, we were able to do more coordinating among all these different places. It didn't require thousands of dollars of funding to have an encuentro, an encounter group, and that sort of thing. So one of the questions in the chat is also about COVID and the pandemic. And so I wanted to tie those together as well. So one of the questions was about authority and authenticity. If you're decentralizing this transitional justice process, how do you get people to trust it? And how do you, especially, Latin America tends to have a fairly legalistic culture, right? We have a trust when it's from the official institution and it's written down and all of that. And that was a challenge, right? But in this space outside of Colombia, you have a countervailing source of authority where, as Cécile mentioned, the embassies and consulates, which would have been an alternate way to do this, right? Have it be decentralized in official spaces through the consulates, but quite frequently forced migrants, Colombians who had been forced to flee the country, didn't trust the Colombian government and would have been very reluctant to come and give a testimony to an official representative of the government if they were worried how that data would be used, who might get access to it afterwards. And so, although I agree with the person who asked the question that could be used as a critique, where does this authority come from and everything, there's a sort of countervailing critique for a lot of the exiles. And there were attempts within the nodes. I know in the US nodes, several of us said, can we have a letter or something showing, the Colombian Truth Commission recognizes this group as, helping us to take testimonies. And it was sort of an ambiguous space that we had to negotiate, because on the one hand, too much officialness could have risked the trust with the forced migrant, with the exiles. But on the other hand, you wanted enough quality control and that you weren't doing harm. And so all of the people who were taking testimonies had to go through a pretty rigorous training, I think, Cécile, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in every case directly with Carlos Beristain.
With Carlos Beristain, or sometimes with some of his staff or liaison officer.
So for those who were taking the testimonies, especially, that was a really important thing to ensure that everyone was clear about the processes, procedures, reducing risk, etc. And there were pretty significant security kinds of procedures in place to guarantee authenticity and stuff, with notes directly uploaded to a secure platform where they were then transcribed and analyzed. So I'll just put that for that one. I think the one other place I'll intervene is on the question that came up here towards the end about other literatures in the transnational activism, transnational networks and stuff. So we are trying to consider, right now we're talking about it in terms of networked transitional justice, network transnational transitional justice. Hopefully we'll be able to come up with a better and more concise term than that by the time we're publishing, but that at least tells you what we want to talk about. And we're, of course, drawing on existing literature and theories there. This is a kind of a new niche within it, because this is a new model, right? Colombia innovated it, but we're building a lot on Kek and Sekink, transnational activist networks, in the way that they have people from all over the world around a particular issue and advocating it, because some of what the nodes were doing was advocacy, both within their spaces to help people understand about the value of the Truth Commission process, and backwards, right, to advocate to the Colombian government and to the Truth Commission for this idea of highlighting the role of victims abroad. And so that played in some. We're also drawing on epistemic communities that you may have heard about, where the role of academia that Cécile talked about was really quite key. And not only as convenient kind of administrative spaces that had the ability to fulfill some needs, but also in innovating ideas. The language of nodes comes from sociology and network analysis. That's been around for a long time, and it's not guaranteed that the Colombian Truth Commission would choose to use that language to describe what they're doing. And so I would say that's a contribution from academia that helped them to have a language to talk about what they're doing. The choice of talking about exile specifically is a choice, right? They could have talked about displacement, they could have talked about refugees or migrants or other things, and they chose to talk about exile, in part because Carlos Beristain had shared with Cécile and me that it was really important to him both to capture that idea of geographic distance from the home country, but at least as important, the political nature of it. It's not accidental that folks are there. And it's not that they're only victims, right? They also have agency. And so their political agency, as well as the politics that produce their displacement, is all captured in the concept of exile. And that also is a result of some of the academic debates that have happened. So I think that those are some of the literatures we're drawing on, and also networked governance. There's a literature on public-private partnerships and multi-stakeholder kinds of governance, because some of what was happening here was the Colombian government said, here are policy outcomes that we need to have happen, and we need a new arrangement to do them. And it's going to need to draw on partnerships with international organizations, NGOs, academia, et cetera. And so some of the same logic that applies usually in domestic spaces is where this literature on networked governance has happened. We're trying to extend and see how it both applies and is different in transnational spaces. So
thank you, Jeff.
May I just something very quick to what
please.
Also Jeff was saying about the use of the term exile. It really also came from listening to people who didn't want to be called victims.
Yeah.
So many people really didn't like that term because victims sort of implies, oh, you're a poor victim and you don't have agency. So they preferred other terms. In particular, they liked the term exile or refugee. They prefer this kind of, or survivors, if you want, but they didn't like the term victim. So exile was a kind of a consensus among people. And that's why, as Jeff said, Commissioner Beristain then said, there is a consensus behind this term. People want to be called this way because it reflects better their experience and their interest in participating in the process. Because as you could see from my presentations, they were not only giving their testimonies, they were taking testimonies, they were involved in recognition activities. So sometimes they were documenting and presenting particular cases. So they were really active. So that's why also the term, this is the reason why they chose exile.
Yeah, we had here at the University of Notre Dame a very special role as monitoring of the implementation of the Accord, together with Jeff, thanks to the help of people like Patrick. What we said is, because this participation on the chapter of exile was so active, we said, we don't want to take testimonies because we cannot implement the peace accord. We need to monitor the process of implementation. The best that we can do is accompany the process. And in that sense, we became facilitators of many of the online meetings precisely due to COVID. So if you remember during this time, the COVID pandemic really, not just the COVID pandemic, actually the measures to prevent the spread of COVID was really shaped a lot of the processes, and it really changed the information, not just the flow of information. And this was not only in terms of facilitating a lot of the meetings, as Jeff was saying, but if you remember, it was exactly the same argument used in Colombia in order to extend the mandate of the Truth Commission. So it is one of those factors that when we think about how can this experience be reflected upon, how can we learn from this for other transitional justice contexts, right? If we think of Ecuador, that has more population in exile than in the country, for the Nicaragua. This is something we need to get really good at if we want to, in the future, create processes of transitional justice that are as close as possible to a comprehensive truth. So I think that these are all elements of that collection of information that changes the nature of information and that shapes the relationships and sometimes helps us feel safer than a face-to-face encounter. So thank you. I wanna maybe go and ask our public guests, Emma and Patrick, and you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can we start like this? Yeah. Emma.
Thanks so much, Cécile and Jeff, for this. It's been really interesting. And I had two questions. First, about this process of training for testimony taking. I'm sure there's too much to go into with what that looks like, but maybe some of the elements that struck you as most core to the process or most unique about this approach to testimony taking. And then also, Cécile, I was intrigued by you mentioning the splitting of nodes in certain cases. So I wondered if you could share a bit more about how that affected operations and what that looked like in terms of trying to work towards this mission.
Thank you so much. Patrick?
Yeah, I had a question about the effects that you think this process might have on foreign policy for the Colombian state. I mean, you mentioned sort of distrust occurring for the state. Is there some sort of, do you envision some sort of channel in which the state starts to represent itself differently overseas or becomes closer to the communities that are in exile?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to share with us your name?
Oh, my name is Gregory.
Hello, Gregory.
Yeah, I have a couple more technical questions. The first question is, maybe I did not quite get it from the stock and the slides, but in these networks that you have shared with us, what is like the more formal definition of the link between the nodes in the network? And the second question is, how was the data that you have collected, the testimony data, I guess, how was it collected? How was it used to construct the network?
The last question?
Yeah, how was the data that you have collected, the qualitative data, the testimonies, then used, what process was used to then transform it into this graph, this network?
Okay, for the interviews, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, I would encourage Cécile, but also Kat and Maria Paula to respond to the questions in general.
Okay, I'll try to be short. About the training, what was, I think, most interesting, in my view, is that first, there was really emphasis on listening. What was more important than anything else was listening to the person, and that for that person, this experience to be meaningful. So if the person didn't feel comfortable at some point and didn't want to continue, then, that was it. And this was something to be respected. So a very, very important attention to the person you have in front and for this experience to be meaningful. Also, we didn't only focus on the human rights violations themselves, but also the impact that such human rights violations had on this person individually, on this person's family, on this person's community group. So a variety of different impacts and, all kinds of impacts, psychological, health, many types of impacts, loss of a job, loss of economic status, and how this person also had overcome, or what had helped this person overcome, all these impacts. And then we also had a part on where we gave a space to the person to make recommendations for non-repetition, recommendations to be better repaired, in all its sense, being recognized and so on and so forth. And there was a specific part on exile as an experience in itself. Like Josefina was saying, exile for the Truth Commission was considered a human rights violation in itself, not only the human rights violations that led to exile, but exile in itself as a human rights violation. Really, for example, I mean, as a testimony taker, I had, for example, a woman who talked to me for the first time of sexual violence. She had not told anyone else before. And at the end of the interview, I was like really happy because she said, look, now I'm going to tell my mother because she doesn't understand why I left. And so that was really wonderful. And this was actually online. It was not even in person. But yeah, we had to do, during the pandemic, we had no choice. And it was interesting because people wanted to do it anyway. I had really people who were so much wanting they were really wanting to give their testimony. We had other people, for example, with whom I was in touch all the time. They've been involved in many activities and they never wanted to give their testimony. They didn't have the courage or the strength to do it. But others, on the contrary, they were just so eager to have that space. So about the splitting of the notes, sometimes it was actually maybe better in some way. And as you could see, the Truth Commission had a very flexible approach to it. They didn't want to force people who were not interested in working together, were not feeling comfortable or had different views on how to do the work to work together. So it was like very flexible. And in the end, you could have, in the same countries, different groups working for the Truth Commission and doing things differently. And it was sometimes better. In some cases, as I mentioned, there were efforts to kind of mediate between these different groups, and they were able to work together, even like people with very different views, political views, and so on. But in other cases, it was more like work in parallel. And because also of the limited amount of time and everything, I think maybe that was the best approach to take. I don't know. Your question very briefly. There is an implication about this experience. For example, now there is the peace process between the Colombian government and the ELN, and you have a very important element of that peace process is public participation, and you have the diaspora recognized as one social sector for public participation. So this public participation process is taking place in the many countries where you have Colombians abroad, not only exiled people, also the Colombian diaspora as such, but they are using the structure developed by the Truth Commission to conduct this public participation. For example, I was involved in the first phase of the public participation process, organizing a meeting to collect the views of Colombian people in Ecuador, for the design of the public participation outside of Colombia. So, you can already see an impact, and I'm sure that if there is a future Truth Commission, for example, in Nicaragua, in many other places, they will take into account this experience, and I'm sure people in exile from these countries will, push for this kind of inclusion. And then maybe I'll give the floor to Jeff because I don't want to answer to all the questions. So the links between notes and the data from our interview, Jeff, I think I didn't answer these two questions.
Sure, I can start there and then also address the question on the foreign policy thing. I think the others are fine. So Gregory, thanks for that question. So when you see the line connecting the nodes on the sociogram that Cécile put up, maybe I'll say how it came from the interview data first, because that helps. So when we were doing these semi-structured interviews with people who were coordinating nodes, who were members of nodes, kind of key actors, as well as the Colombian Truth Commission staff, we were asking a lot about what were the organizations that were involved, what kinds of resources or sort of what did each one do, and how did they interact, who was kind of the key actors. And so we've had a matrix that has every organization that was mentioned, we transcribed the interviews and had an RA go through those and pull out the organizations, the actors that were mentioned, and put them into a matrix with each one representing a row and then the same ones representing a column, because we wanted to hear which ones interacted. Maybe they said, oh, well, these were the 4 organizations that were really active in our node. And so each of those 4 organizations would be connected with each other in the node, as well as with the Colombian Truth Commission. Almost all of the actors in our network had at least some contact directly with the Truth Commission, which is why you see it as this hub of the whole thing. There's lots of other more nuanced connections among the organizations, but there aren't very many, at least that we found so far, that are connected only indirectly and had no contact at all with the Truth Commission staff. So that's how we got from the data to the visualization. And so that link between the organizations indicates that they were working together. They had interaction and contact within their node or within the work of the Truth Commission. And, as we this is a work in progress, right? So we are continuing to do interviews and we're continuing to do a lot more analysis. So the network visualization will become a lot more complex, and we'll be able to identify clusters and try to say things about those clusters, right? And so the type of actor will matter. And I want to tie in one of the questions from the chat from Nassim, who asks about, were there some stronger actors than others? Were you surprised whether an actor that you thought would be influential but maybe turned out to be different? That's some of the stuff that we're hoping to do with this. And which actors are strong or not is actually a hard question, because you might think that those that are well-funded or those that are government organizations are by definition stronger. But in this context, strength often, and our argument with this networked approach, is that social capital is a really important form of strength that they drew on to help enable the work of the Truth Commission. And so it may be that a key actor that was able to influence outcomes and was able to contribute to lots of testimonies being brought in and sort of bring in voices that otherwise wouldn't, and in that sense they're a strong actor, might be a loosely organized network of victims in a country that has no budget, no juridical kind of legal entity of its own, but has so much social capital, right? They're trusted by their community who are willing to come and talk to them as interviewers. They have one of our interviewees made the argument that a lot of the Colombian exiles in her country had a lot of administrative experience. They had run businesses and NGOs and other stuff like that in Colombia, and so they were well prepared to be leaders. And that set of skills and just the disposition became a real resource that was put to the service of the Colombian Truth Commission. And so that sort of ability both to have access and trust, as well as the leadership capacity to sustain the work, I think were one of the benefits of this type of network. And we're going to try to be able to identify those nodes, those key nodes that made the difference.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure that we give Kat and Maria Paula also the opportunity to respond in this last 5 minutes. So, Maria, should we start with you? Thank you.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to add for your question, Patrick, that there are 35 recommendations for non-repetition related to the exile process. 2 of them are related to international and foreign policy issues. One of them precisely towards the frontiers, because of borders. Thank you, because of the challenges that it means for Colombia. And all the others are very much related to the victims unit, and they are trying now to make that reality happen. So it's the job of a Colombian state institution, which task is to repair the victims, to keep also the eye and the levels of recognition on the victims or survivors abroad, and they are doing now structural changes and all they need to do in order to make that happen legally as we like. Well, as it is needed also, but after it's legally done, we also need that to be budgetized and all the rest.
And maybe on this point, it's not that the victims unit didn't have some work outside of the country before, but really it had many deficiencies. So that's why the recommendation of the Truth Commission pointed out the very many problems that prevented, for example, many victims abroad to receive a reparation. So there is.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything specific to add. I did think that the part on exile is really, like, from a migration mental health, like that literature perspective, really useful and interesting as a way to kind of bring together some of the political experiences and sort of, navigate linguistically that really unique situation. So I thought that was also something useful. I think Jeff was speaking to that. So.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I just, what is left for me is just to thank everyone who stayed here in our room until the very end. Of course, our speakers, both. Peter, hello, Peter. Thank you so much for being with us from the UK note. Of course, Cécile, thank you for coming here. Maria Paula and Kat, thank you for your feedback, your response. Everyone, on the 18th of April, we will have the president of the Special Tribunal for Peace, some of the staff, our friends from USIP, coming here to speak about not just transnational, but also transitional justice and the challenges of restorative approach. So we hope to see you here.
Roger McGinty is also.
Roger McGinty will be here on the 26th of March. We're very much looking forward to listening to him and Microdynamics of Reconciliation, a tri-state project comparing very, very small dynamics in Lebanon, Colombia, and Northern Ireland. And last but not least, we do have open right now the application call for both external grants, like the one that Cécile is enjoying now, and for internal grants, like the ones that our students can apply to and our faculty. So thank you, and thank you very much, especially to our staff that accompanies us and feeds us and loves us eternally. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.